Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Ambassadors Group training and information session. I've got a very special guest on the Zoom with me today, Ron Fijalkowski. He's with Epic Sports. But before we bring on Ron officially, I just want to make sure everybody's aware of what we're doing here today. We're going to be talking about the importance of athletic testing and the components that go into that. At the Ambassadors Group, we want to be very, very specific with our athletes. And what Ron's going to describe here today is something that personally I haven't seen anywhere, which is one of the reasons, not the only reason, that we selected Epic Sports and Ron to do our athletic testing. They're doing some revolutionary things, some innovative things. And I'll let Ron tell you his background and Epic Sports background, and then we'll get into some of the components of our athletic testing component of the Ambassadors Group. So Ron, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for having me. I'm excited to be here, talk a little bit about what we have found a lot of common ground with.
We sure have. We have a real passion for helping these athletes. You've been doing it at a epic level, no pun intended. But why don't you share with our listeners a little bit about your background, because you've got quite the resume.
Sure. So you know how much I love talking about myself, but for as much as that is, I grew up in South Jersey, went out to Milwaukee, Wisconsin for whatever unknown reason. I decided to go out there and enjoy the cold. And I went to a program at the Milwaukee School of Engineering, graduated with a Bachelor's of Science degree in biomedical engineering. I then went to a joint program between Marquette University and the Medical College of Wisconsin, and was lucky enough to graduate with a PhD in biomedical engineering. Since
Amazing.
that time, I was able to come to Epic Sports Biomechanics and ARCA and figure out this whole sports biomechanics thing.
Wow, that's fantastic. You're gonna have to numb it down for people like me, because I'll tell you, some of the stuff you guys do is so out there in a good way, but people like me can't understand it. So I might, if I have to stop you and say, wait, layman's term here, don't be offended. Okay.
No, of course not.
Okay. So that tremendous background and educational experience led you to Epic Sports. Tell us a little bit about Epic Sports.
Sure. So it's about 24 people big now. We have a lot of people like myself. I'm the director of the group. We have a lot of people who have PhDs in biomechanical engineering, biomedical engineering, or kinesiology. We also have current and former Division I collegiate players who function primarily as performance specialists. Our goal is to take a lot of the biomechanical principles and apply them to athletes, to make them develop in a way that is both healthy for the long term and optimizes their performance on the field, whether it be baseball or softball or even other sports like basketball and golf and football. You name it, we do the biomechanical assessments, and then we write the individual development plans to put them on the right path.
So we're going to be talking about the individual development plans a little later in the show here, but forgive me for this, but I'm going to numb it down even on the term biomechanical. Now, I'm pretty sure I know what it means, but help us understand for people maybe that aren't even familiar with that terminology. What does that really mean?
Sure. It means just trying to understand how the body responds to forces. So whether you're playing baseball or driving down the street in your car, right? There are different pushing and pulling forces going on with your body. The way in which you respond to those forces and the way in which you move is all dependent upon your physiology. So your physical attributes, things like your flexibility or mobility, even your training history, your diet, your sleep patterns, all come into play in terms of optimizing your movement efficiency when you're playing a sport. So we focus on those principles to try to understand the human body, most specifically the individual in front of us that given day, and get them on the right path.
You know, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about who traditionally got this kind of training. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's like Olympic athletes and MLB players and NBA players and NFL players and NHL. In other words, the highest highs. But what, like that's what I imagine those people getting as part of their development. But what you're talking about is taking the same level to amateur athletes.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better. I mean, honestly, at the inception of Epic, the goal was to take these high-level technologies, whether it be motion capture or IMUs or force plates and all of this neat stuff that I call toys, right? But taking that to the players that, in my personal opinion, would get the most value out of it. Because the players that are already at the professional level, yes, they need it to try to prevent injuries, but it's the developing athletes that could get even more benefit from it, because now we're starting at a base and we can take that piece of clay, if you will, right? And taking a term that I know you and I have talked about in the past,
mold it,
and
shape
molding it,
Yeah.
and shaping it to their athletic future.
So that you mentioned something about preventing injuries, but we're also talking, I mean, that's obviously critical, but we're also talking about maximizing performance too, right? So a lot of these athletes, I'm sure in your world, you would look at them and say, wow, if they only knew what I know and what they could do, they would be far exceeding the level they're playing at. I mean, we're going to get into some real life stories here in a little bit, but would you say that's accurate to say a lot of people are, I use the word underachieving because they don't know what you know?
Yeah, it's a fair statement. I think, especially from my background, right? When I was growing up and doing a lot of my own baseball training, right? There was a line of thought that everybody moves in the same way, that there's one perfect mechanical pattern that you can perform to become the next Ken Griffey Jr. in my day, right? There are now concepts out there like nonlinear pedagogy and the constraints-led approach and all of these different avenues that have taught us that everybody is different, that everybody moves in accordance with their physiology and their anatomy. And if we can just simply understand them more specifically, then we can understand their limitations and we can start to drive a pattern that is more efficient and more adaptable. So we need these athletes that are more malleable to ultimately developing in a way that will not only prevent injuries, because they go hand in hand, right?
Right.
If you can move in a very efficient pattern, you're not only going to be a better hitter or pitcher, for example, but you're also going to be at much lower risk for future injury or long-term injury.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, I don't mean to digress, but I think you and I talked about it when I was down there, that when I do tryouts, I ask kids to do this simple little exercise. They basically stand on one foot, go down and touch their knee with the other one and back up without moving. And inevitably, almost none of them can do that. And I always ask them, what's it take? It takes strength, it takes balance, it takes flexibility. And yet we're asking athletes to make certain plays in the act of competition that they're physically not even capable of doing. Like, if you just broke it down, how unfair is that for mom and dad to be sitting and say, why didn't Johnny make that play in the hole and throw that runner out like Derek Jeter did? Why didn't he do that? He's physically incapable of doing it. You wouldn't ask anybody to do something they were physically incapable of, but you're seeing that every single day in your work.
It's amazing because when you take this down to a level of 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, right? And you start to think about these players, a lot of them, their only goal as a hitter would be to just make contact with the baseball, right? So what they're inherently doing is freezing joints. They're preventing those joints from moving because they want to control the bat in their hands. So they don't develop as much power. They don't understand that there's so much more to the lower half that they could otherwise take advantage of. So, and a lot of times from a youth perspective, it's just teaching these players how to move, and balance, like you're describing, is one of the biggest things that a lot of athletes suffer from not being able to do, right? Is just being able to have that core stability, to be able to move in a complex fashion. And one of the places that I see it a lot in is just a simple hip hinge pattern, right? A hip hinge is what you perform when you're doing a deadlift or a squat. And a lot of players I will talk to say, well, I'm lifting in my basement. I'm getting really strong. And I try to just do a simple movement assessment where they're asked to do a deadlift and their back looks like a U. And you go, well, that's not a good movement pattern, right? And you can realize very quickly that this athlete needs some real training to be able to move in a more efficient manner so that they can take advantage of all the power that they otherwise possess.
Yeah. So, I mean, what we are talking about is knowledge is power, right? Information is power. And I can only imagine the people listening to this show right now thinking, I don't know any of this. I know one thing, I didn't know any of it. You just go out and play, right?
Yeah.
Anymore, it's not like that. There's experts like you that are available now to amateur athletes, which is just incredible. So let's segue into this baseline, because as the founder of the ambassadors group, what I was looking for, and what one of the reasons that led me to you, was I wanted to get a baseline on our athletes. In fact, I wanted to use it. I do want to use it as an evaluation tool, because the reality of it is, at the ambassadors group, we're looking for athletes who have the physical potential to play at the next level. Most of them want to play Division I sports. So we have to make sure we're using good discretion on the players that we're bringing into the program. Well,
sure.
Going out and hitting a kid a couple ground balls, watching them throw, run a 60-yard dash. Yeah, you're a pretty good player. That's just not getting it anymore. So right. I'd love for you to talk about what your version of athletic testing is, and just go into as much detail as you want of the things that you have in your program that we will use to test our athletes.
Sure. So just like any other test, right? If you compare it to maybe an SAT or an ACT, it's an intellectual test, and it's a standardized test that you can take as many times as you want. Obviously, you don't want to take it that many times, but what I perform are physical tests in comparison to intellectual tests. And one of the initial things that is brought out by that testing is an immediate comparison to your peers, right? So how are you doing, and how do you match up with players of your age, even down to the month? How well do you match up with players born in the same month as you? Because we all know about graduation years and eligibility years for play time, starting that May 1st cutoff. That's different than academic years. So we need that comparison to ultimately understand how this player will develop in the future. Because the idea is, not only do you need that comparison, but you need to be able to say, okay, we have these physical attributes. And so what we're doing is we perform a skill test as well as physical tests. Our skill tests will use things like motion capture, or maybe the IMUs, as well as some common technologies like Rapsodo or HitTrax, maybe a blast sensor or a Motus sleeve. And we will use sometimes force plates and pressure mats to ultimately understand how the player performs in their sport of interest. So if they're a hitter, we will put them through a hitting assessment or a hitting test. So that will give us an understanding of exactly how they perform as a hitter. We then pair that hitting test with a number of different physical tests, some traditional movement tests like a functional movement screen, We'll do some of the tests from a baseball U type assessment. We'll do some more traditional physical therapy tests to evaluate flexibility and mobility. And then we'll do some injury-specific tests. So things like a shoulder complex to evaluate anything from scapular dyskinesis to rotator cuff injury to maybe UCL integrity. And we'll take all of that information and we'll compare it with athleticism tests. My job with all of that information is then to take it and evaluate through all of that comparison to see where that athlete is here in the now, and then where they might be in the future, to be able to predict what the best plan is for them.
So that's a perfect segue. And I don't even want to try to piggyback on that because you said it so perfectly, but you said where they might be. That to me is the real crux of the matter. That to me is where the rubber meets the road, because an athlete comes to you and here is your evaluation today. Like it, don't like it, but it's real, right? This is where you are. This is where you could be if you do this, and this. But what I've seen is without what you're doing, number one, they don't even know where they are. They don't even know where they stack up. Okay. Everybody thinks they're so good, but they might find out that they're not. But let's just say they do know where they are, and they do know where they want to get there, but they don't know how to get there. Right.
That's the biggest problem.
Yeah. So they say, I want to play at LSU, and you're looking at their baseline saying, well, here's what an LSU player would look like. We're going to have to get you there. They're not giving scholarships to kids just because they're good little players. right? So let's talk about the steps to get there. Because to me, that's okay. Here's where I am. I'm too slow. I'm not flexible enough. My hips don't work. My arm action is whatever. Right. Ron, how do I get to here? Let's talk about the IDP.
Sure. So the goal is what I work under is a test retest model. So I have athletes, and this is what the plan is for the ambassadors group. They come through, they are assessed, both the skill tests as well as the individual physical tests. We give them that baseline. And from some, we will also work to try to understand what they can be. We will give them those projections, and that's where this individual development plan comes in. In most situations, what we do is we expect to run a test, and then in about 4 times a year, we run the same type of test. And what that does is it provides the baseline, and it holds both the athlete and us accountable to determine what their progress looks like over the long term, maybe that short term 3 months, but then down the road, where do they have to be, and what are their goals for that player to be able to achieve that level of play that they want. So if they do want to go to LSU and they want to understand how to get there, now we have a nice roadmap from a baseline standpoint. Maybe they're a 13-year-old player and they want to go and play at LSU. Well, they better be able to throw a baseball 90 plus miles an hour. So maybe they throw 65 plus right now, but now we have a nice clear roadmap between 65 and 90. And we have to figure out what physical attributes do we currently have and how can we get them to throw that hard.
I'm sure it's frustrating for you in some ways to see kids who have, maybe you see them, they have the ability, just casual observation, they have the ability, they want to go to LSU. We're not just saying LSU, pick any school, right? Any Division I school. And they could get there, but they're not doing anything like what you're talking about. I mean, that's got to be just like a Hail Mary, right? Just like a stab in the dark. I'm going to wing it from 12 years old to 17. I'm just going to work really hard, and I think I can get to LSU, right? And we know it just doesn't work that way.
It doesn't. I think the biggest thing one of the bigger things that I run into is that mentality that I'm going to work really hard. Well, unfortunately, we're all human, right? And our desire is sometimes on January 1st, you're going to see the gyms across this nation be full packed of people, right? But by January 30th, that might not necessarily be the case.
Right.
Okay. So it takes a plan, a well laid out plan with goals, with the understanding that some days you're going to be at your best, some days you're going to be at your worst, and you're going to have to get through those peaks and valleys by working toward a goal. And if that goal is staring you in the face every single day, you know what you have to do. And it can be a real blessing to ultimately understand what that goal is, see it every day, have a tracking sheet that monitors your progress and ultimately allows you to stay focused on that goal.
Yeah, this is like the clouds parting, really, for me to hear you say it, because I've been doing this whole thing for 17 years, and I've been doing this at a very elementary level, albeit it's worked. I mean, we've had over 1,000 kids move on to college baseball and pro baseball, and we were doing this. But what you're talking about doing, the level of detail, the level of accountability, the level of sophistication is light years ahead of where we ever were. So I can only imagine, for the people listening, what I want them to hear loud and clear is with a plan, you're swinging the odds as far in your favor as they could be swung. Without a plan, you're like, it's like playing the lottery. Like you're literally, take a shot at it, and hope for the best.
I completely agree. I mean, I have an example here. I could probably show everybody if I could get my share screen.
Yeah, let's see it
to work. This is a player that now plays Division I college baseball. Mark, can you see that okay?
Yeah, I can see it. Great.
All right. So it's just going to play in the background here. And maybe this just gives you a little bit of a feel for some of the assessments that we're using. This is a full-scale motion capture assessment. Obviously, this is a hitting assessment. You can see some of the Rapsodo units on the ground. And what we're doing is we're tracking everything that's going on with his body, as well as everything that's going on with the ball. So we have a full input and response type analysis here to try to figure out how do we get this player to achieve his goal, right? What was unique about this particular player is he came to us 220 pounds. He is absolutely athletically inclined. He has a lot of physical strength and prowess. And ultimately, he was like a brick, okay? He did not possess the flexibility and mobility necessary to get into the movement patterns that he was otherwise able to achieve, or we needed him to achieve. Liana here is very similar, also a Division I player. Had some mechanical inefficiencies with the swing that she has on this particular screen. Great athlete, really dedicated to her craft, and just with a few minor tweaks was able to take advantage of the flexibility and mobility that she otherwise possesses. So these are the types of things that we're able to do with all these toys that I otherwise described previously.
It's awesome. And it gets me thinking about another topic. Excuse me, Ron. We didn't talk about this in our pre-call, but I'm going to put you on the spot here. I have heard about windows of opportunity in terms of the ability to learn, the ability to grow. And, one of the biggest questions I get asked all the time is, what age should we start all this stuff? And personally, I'm a big believer in starting as early as possible. I said to one parent one day, I said, well, what age do you start teaching your son or daughter about respect, about accountability, and about doing the right thing? When do you start? Do you wait till they're in high school to start talking about doing the right thing, or right out of the gate? The answer is obvious. We're starting early with important things. So I don't mean to stack the question or load the question, but what would be your answer on when these kids have the biggest ability to adapt and learn and actually do this stuff the right way? How early?
Yeah, as early as possible.
Okay.
I think it's a lifelong kind of lesson, right? And what I'm often asked to do is work with groups that are as young as 10, 11, and 12 years old. And obviously what we're teaching at that point is much different than what we work with on a 20-year-old, 25-year-old plus athlete. But at that young level, what we're trying to do is breed good habits. Just like trying to teach somebody about the value of respect, what we're trying to do here is teach them the value of an actual warm-up, right? A dynamic warm-up, an actual cool down. What does a practice really look like? How much do you expect to have coaching feedback? When is too much? Why is yelling at a player a bad thing, maybe, in certain contexts, right? And all of these things can be taught and ingrained at a young level. It's only going to benefit them as they get older.
Yeah, well said. Well, we're on the same page. Parents don't know. And one of the ones that drive me crazy is the ones that wait and wait and wait and wait. And then they come to you at 15, 16, 17 years old and say, my son wants to play at LSU. And he's not even close to that. And they thought they were on time, and they are so late to the party. So for the parents listening out there, you just heard Ron say it. I'm going to say it one more time: as early as possible. Obviously, the ambassadors group, we're taking on our clients starting at 13 years old. We want to get them. We want to have a relationship with 12-year-olds. And we're selecting our players at 13. That's not to say we won't take a 14 or a 15 or 16. Obviously, there are going to be some exceptions. And there's also going to be some kids that when we do the testing, we go, okay, you're not that far off. But to find a kid at 15, 16, 17 that's not that far off it's not easy to find kids.
It's a lot harder. I would agree with everything you said. And especially that heartbreaking moment when you realize somebody at 17 years old has these real high aspirations, and unfortunately it's going to be really tough. There's not a place to play baseball. It just might not be a Division I program at that point, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we're not trying to make Division I the end all be all, but if you ask most kids at 13 to make their list of where they want to go, they're putting the LSUs and the Florida States and the, Miami's on their list. And we've had lots of kids get there, but they had a good plan. They were capable of it, and we helped them all the way through the journey, and they got on to that. So we're just really talking about getting kids early now from an athletic standpoint, getting that baseline, and then having that developmental plan all the way through. And one other thing, and it's not I don't think it's your field of expertise, but I'll touch on it. Everybody thinks exposure. You hear exposure all the time. And I just got to squelch this idea that that's the name of the game when you're 14, 15, 16 years old, 17, need exposure. I like to say exposure is a very slippery slope. You are getting exposed. Now, if you've been prepared and groomed like your athletes are, the moment comes when you need the exposure, you get the exposure, and boom, they love you. Why? Because you were groomed for that exposure moment. But what if you get exposure when you weren't groomed for it? Guess what? You got exposed. You're not good enough. You get scratched off the list. So I always caution parents exposure is a timing thing. And if you're not groomed for it, you don't want to be playing in front of college coaches.
You couldn't be more right about that, Mark. I mean, honestly, the one of the bigger problems that I sometimes have is people trying to understand the difference between Epic and some other programs that exist out there. And where you're suggesting to put that time and expense is really in development, right? When somebody comes and sees that player play, they better be the best, right? That's where they want to be. They don't want to see somebody that is 18 years old and can throw 50 miles an hour. That's being exposed, I think, is basically what you're describing.
Yeah, it is. And the level has gotten higher and higher and higher. I think at the Jupiter World Wood Bat last year, I think there were over 200 high school players that threw over 90. At that one event. Okay. So that threshold's getting higher and higher and higher too. So that kid that used to throw 85 that everybody thought was a pretty good pitcher get, college coaches are yawning watching him. And,
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
he thought he was really good. So let's wrap this up. Obviously, that you mentioned the word investment, cost. Another pet peeve of mine is people. And again, I don't mean to sound like a know-it-all, but at the Ambassadors Group, one of the things that we like to do is help our people make wise decisions with their money.
Yes.
There's a lot of people wasting literally thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars on the wrong plan. And I hate to use black and white terms, the wrong plan, but I see them like we've had kids where say, oh, I'm just going to take the fall off and I'm just going to go to a couple camps. Like that's where they're going to spend their time and their money. So you're talking about money into your personal development, you as an individual. I can't think of anywhere better to spend somebody's money than in that. Because again, you can spend $4,000 to play on a travel program, and that's probably about the going rate these days now, and go out and play in front of college coaches. And if you never invested in you the right way, your money's completely wasted. They don't care. You're playing in front of them and they go scratch, scratch, scratch. So talk about everybody's going to want to, well, what's this cost to your, clients? And let me just, before I get your answer, let me just say this for the Ambassadors Group clients. Obviously, we have a special relationship with Epic Sports. So our clients are getting an amazing value out of this and deal. But just for the rank and file, what does some of these tests cost?
Yeah, so our IMU assessments for a lot of our regional athletes who come in 4 times a year, each time they come in, they're paying over $450 for that assessment. Now that includes an individual development plan, something that they're not going to get anywhere else. So obviously we find that to be very valuable to our clients. But the other part of this is the motion capture assessments. So things like I can show you here examples where you're ending up able to do something like this type of assessment, where you have all those markers on your body, and you do this multiple times a year. That can cost over $1,000 for those that aren't a part of your group.
And that is a tremendous value in and of itself. I mean, I had 2 sons come through, this whole process. I would have spent that in a heartbeat if I would have known this, if this even did exist. It might not have back in those days because this is cutting edge technology. But my point is this, that's a great value even in of itself. I mean, I was thinking it was going to be even way more than that. I mean, again, we're talking about amateur athletes here. I mean, this is what the pros are getting, and now the amateur athletes are getting this. But yes, Ambassadors Group clients are even going to get this at a completely different price structure, and that's just something that value. The relationship that we have with you, Ron, is again, I'm thinking of terrible puns, but it's epic. It's so huge that I couldn't be more excited. I'm so glad we had this conversation. I'm so glad we were able to record it so people could understand the magnitude of what we're talking about here. To me, this is make or break. Like, this is, kid, you got an opportunity to do this. You can get there. You don't do this, all bets are off. That's how big I think this is.
I agree, couldn't agree more. I'm really excited about this. I think these athletes are going to be put through an experience that they couldn't otherwise find, maybe across this nation.
Yeah, I agree. Well, they're in good hands with you and in the Ambassadors Group. So Ron, I'll wrap it up. Is there anything we've missed or anything you wanted to throw out there before we wrap it up?
No, Mark, I think we did a great job of covering it all. Now, like
I
said, I'm really excited.
I do too. So thank you so much for your time and lots of fun ahead.
Great.
Bye-bye.